Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 88. As you can sort of see by the length of this video/audio episode, it's a long one because Radeon's made some blunders. We're going to be talking about AMD's disastrous decision to remove driver support for RDNA 1 and 2 products and then their backtrack on that. So yeah, lots of things to get through in this one. Let's get into it. Once again on a podcast, we're going to start off by talking about our favorite company, Microsoft.
Oh, no.
Because maybe it turns out that this podcast has more influence than we actually think. I think it has virtually zero influence.
Okay, good.
But there's been two stories I've seen this week that directly relate to the previous couple of podcasts. The first one, I complained about update and shut down, just straight up not doing that. Doesn't work. You click update and shut down. It restarts your PC, leaves it on, doesn't shut it down. But this week, I have seen a news article from the website Windows Latest saying update and shut down has been fixed. Apparently, an optional update or something like this has been addressed. Microsoft specifically say they've addressed an underlying issue which can cause update and shut down to not actually shut down your PC after updating. This is in a support document.
In that document, did they say this has been brought to our attention by Tim on the Hardware Unboxed podcast?
Look, I haven't actually read the notes fully, so I'm not
possible.
sure. It's possible that we are mentioned in there.
Okay, good.
What's actually amazing, though, is that I feel like this has been an issue for years. So they're only just coming around to fixing it now after maybe we made a poll on the Hardware Unboxed Twitter account as well, like maybe a couple of months ago, and they've finally gotten around to fixing this is quite incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's story number one.
Okay.
Story number two is this morning I got an email from Microsoft. And if you remember last week's podcast, we were talking about Microsoft being very dodgy with their Microsoft 365 plans and how they had increased the price on the plans and had failed to disclose to customers that there was an optional non-AI version called Microsoft 365 Classic plans that you could move to avoid the price hike. This triggered the Australian ACCC, which is the Competition and Consumer Commission, to sue Microsoft for being misleading towards Australians and the 365 subscription. So this email I got this morning was basically, we effed up big time, and now we're having to make it very clear to you what the actual plan options are. So basically this email says, in October 2024, we announced changes to our Microsoft 365 pricing. We recognize we could have been, maybe they meant 2025, not sure. Anyway, we recognize we could have been clearer in our communication about the full range of Microsoft 365 subscription options, including the option to switch to Microsoft 365 Family Classic. And now they've got a very, very clearly outlined option one. You can stay in your plan for 180 AUD per year, or you can switch to the Classic plan, 139 AUD, which I think was the price that I was paying previously, but you do not get the AI features such as Copilot. And then an article in the ABC was basically saying, yeah, they've apologized for this and basically said that their communication fell short of their standards, which, I mean, that is certainly one way of looking at it. I think they pretty clearly tried to mislead Australians, at least, or I don't know how many countries this applied to, but at the very least, they tried to mislead customers with this and have now massively backflipped on that as soon as it was exposed, especially with the whole thing of you had to even see the Classic plans, you had to click like unsubscribe or something, and then it showed you this is an option. So anyway, that has now been reverted, I guess. My email's got this huge button that says switch to Classic, which I will be pressing at some point. So those are the Microsoft updates for now. But obviously the big topic of this week has got to be AMD's Radeon driver blunder, which happened since we recorded last week's podcast. They made a terrible mistake and have seemed to have backflipped on that largely by the time that we've recorded this. So there's obviously a lot of things to get through and chat about, probably just more of the fallout since we've got two videos on the Hardware Unboxed channel that really go into this. So I guess firstly, AMD attempted to put RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 drivers into a separate driver branch, which they labeled as maintenance mode, which can be interpreted in whatever way that you want. But basically what AMD was saying in their driver notes was that those old architectures would no longer receive game support, game optimizations, new features. This would very much just be critical bug and security fixes. And the majority of the new features, driver optimizations, and all that sort of thing would only be applied to RDNA 3 and 4 graphics cards. So they first revealed this as part of the patch notes for the latest 25.10.2 driver. And then they made a series of statements to the media
Clarifying statements.
Well, depends on your definition of clarifying, doesn't it? Because it doesn't seem like the first couple really clarified anything. Eventually, they got to this point where they've appeared to have backflipped on that, and now they're saying that game support will be provided along at the exact same time as you would see it for RDNA 1 and 2 as RDNA 3 and 4. That's what they confirmed to us. So owners of those old architectures will apparently be getting game optimizations and support in driver updates at the same time, which is, some people are saying that this wording is very similar to the original statements, but that is absolutely not what the original statements said with the whole maintenance mode thing. So it appears that there's been a change there. What are your sort of thoughts on all of this?
Very clear backtrack. There's obviously a lot to get into here. A lot of things have been said. A lot of assumptions have been made, accusations and whatever, with people covering it, AMD, the whole lot. Got quite messy. But I think if we go right to the root of the problem, I think you and I agree. And I mean, it's us saying we're right. But the story is they had planned to separate the drivers, which they've done anyway. That's definitely been done. That there's two different driver branches now. And the reason they did that was not to make it easier or this. Well, it was designed to make it easier for AMD, but it wasn't there. By no means was the intention to improve support for all of the mentioned architectures. So it wasn't going to improve your RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 experience. It wasn't going to improve your support. This wasn't done in a way to optimize or make the process in any way more efficient. So the entire motivation here was to reduce AMD's investment, their workload, and focus their efforts on the products that they're currently selling. Yep. And it was to leave those on RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 behind. So that was absolutely the plan. So I've heard people say, "Oh, whoever released the initial clarifying statement to PC Games Hardware, they're probably going to get fired or whatever." It's like, no, guys, this isn't a big misunderstanding. They did handle getting caught out and the backlash incorrectly, and you could say that it was a blunder to even think they could get away with this. Whatever you want to say there, that's fine. But they absolutely, as a company, decided that they would be moving RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 into maintenance mode where they didn't have to throw a lot of resources optimizing those products for any upcoming games that had issues, and that all future feature developments, optimizations could be focused on RDNA 3 and then RDNA 4 that they're currently selling. So I think you agree that that's what's happened here.
Absolutely, that was their intention. And I think, the miscommunication side of things, AMD sort of tried to suggest that, actually people have just misread that wrong, and that this statement always meant that there would be continued game support. That certainly seems like their most recent communications have implied that. But there's really no ambiguity in some of the statements that they provided earlier. Mm-hmm. Like the driver notes very clearly said that game optimizations and Vulkan extensions, they're available for RX 7000 and 9000 series. The only way to interpret that statement is that game support is only on those newer architectures. Mm-hmm. Now, they said to us that they were going to update that statement to clarify that the Vulkan extensions are for the newer architectures and game support is for RDNA 1 through to RDNA 4. But you couldn't possibly have interpreted the way they'd written that originally to mean that.
Well, if maintenance mode doesn't actually mean maintenance mode, why would you then... You obviously made the mistake of using the term maintenance mode if that isn't what you were doing. Like, words have meaning. And they clearly said when they clarified originally that, yes, we're putting it in maintenance mode. And then when pressed on that, they said maintenance mode again. So they double clarified that RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 are being placed in maintenance mode. And maintenance mode means a very specific thing. So if they didn't mean that, why did they clarify using that terminology twice?
That's right. And they said that, game support and game optimizations, well, they originally said that it would be provided on a market needs basis, which is what maintenance mode is. It's like if there is a critical issue, like a critical bug, something completely breaks your PC or whatever, then they probably will go back and fix the RDNA2 driver branch, which is sort of a market needs thing, isn't it? It's like, well, the market needs the product to work, so they'll provide that.
Mhm.
But anything beyond that is not going to be supported. And, this is something that we've seen many times across the years of driver development.
Yeah, it's not new.
Eventually drivers get put into maintenance mode. And that doesn't mean that they're not still going to produce driver updates, but it just means the updates are going to be a lot less frequent. You may only see 1 or 2 driver updates a year. And you only have to look at the changes they made to Vega drivers not that long ago, where they put Vega into maintenance mode. Like I don't necessarily know whether they used the wording maintenance mode back then. I can't quite remember what they said at the time, but that is what they did. They split off the driver branches for Vega into an older, stable, not updated version for people, and that's currently where things are at right now. Nvidia is doing a very similar thing with Pascal right now. They're just about to put Pascal into a maintenance mode type of thing where they'll be providing security updates and critical fixes for the next 3 years. But prior to that, they're saying that it's been part of their game-ready drivers for the past however many years. So it's a very common thing. Everyone knows what a maintenance mode splitting of driver branches to do this means. And so, I don't think there's any real miscommunication here. They communicated something to begin with, then changed their mind and changed the communication. That's what really happened.
Yeah, it's like you tell a lie, but you really want to get away with the lie, which is why you're telling it. So you tell the lie, someone quizzes you on the lie, and you're like, well, I'm going to try and convince you of the lie. And then you're clearly not buying it. And they're like, well, look, I'm going to backtrack on the lie now. And that, not saying they were lying about what they were doing. It's just they didn't want it to be something that people paid attention to. They're like, look, we don't want to support these products anymore. And you could argue in the case of RDNA 1, probably not a big deal. I think the 5700 XT being the fastest GPU there sort of run its course now. Certainly still usable in a lot of games, but
it's not being sold today either.
It's not sold today. It hasn't been sold for a long time. It's pretty long in the tooth. RDNA 2, you've obviously got very high-end, very capable products like the 60, well, RX, probably even go back to the 6700 XT, but certainly very capable today would be the 6800 XT, 6900 XT, 6950 XT. They're all still very usable products. But then on top of that, like you say, they've got products they're currently still selling that use RDNA 2 graphics. You can still buy RDNA 2 discrete GPUs brand new, but they were selling in large quantities a year ago. Yep. So the start of the year even. So this isn't like a 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-year-old product. Like it's really, if you want to keep selling RDNA 2 for so long and then keep using it in so many products, it really is in a way a current generation product. It's just not the most cutting edge current generation product that AMD have to offer. If you're still making it, it's still current, right?
I've seen some people sort of saying like, RDNA 2 is old, like the architecture was released 5 years ago, so it's around the time that AMD may consider dropping driver support. I think though that you might have been able to get away with that if you were upgrading the architecture every year, like was the case a decade ago, and you could sort of say, well, 5 years ago, that architecture is now 4 or 5 generations old, and sort of the understanding that people tend to upgrade their models every, maybe 3 generations, 4 generations, 3 to 4 years, which is now more like 5 to 7 years. But that's not the case anymore. Like the products that AMD released, a 6950 XT, are people upgrading that model right now to the point where they would be fine with having driver support be moved into a sort of a maintenance mode? The 6950 XT isn't that different in terms of performance to AMD's latest products. Like it's not at the exact same level, but I can't see too many people upgrading from that type of product to like a 9070 XT. It's not a huge upgrade.
But even if they are, like you want to be able to sell, you don't want your Radeon GPU they've purchased and held on to for 3 years maybe to just be worth nothing by the time you go to sell it, or at least be heavily devalued. Because they've, and just to go back a step, when we're talking about it being 5 years old or whatever, they didn't introduce RDNA 3 until the end of 2022. Like it's really a 2023 release, basically. So what's that, 2 years ago now? So realistically, you could have been buying a brand new RDNA 2 GPU 2 years ago, like just
That's
before
right.
the release of RDNA 3. So,
and that's why GPUs tend to be supported with drivers for Nvidia's done 7 to 9 years for some of their products. It's because of these reasons. It's the architecture launches at one date, but that's the introduction date. There's a whole bunch of other relevant dates. There's the date that they announced the last product in the lineup, which could be as much as like a year after the first product. Or I think in the case of RDNA 2, they had announced like refreshed versions of that product. We got the XT series, and then there was the GRE series, some China exclusive models that were years later. And then after that, there's the date that those products stop being sold, which is probably going to be years after the announcement of the final product. And then when you keep doing these refreshes and putting them into APU products and all that sort of thing, there's always this opportunity that there's going to be more products, more refreshes and more releases. And so when you introduce the architecture is sort of relevant, but
not really. Like what you're saying, the 6950 XT was introduced the exact same year as the 7900 XTX. It only came 6 months prior.
Yeah.
They're the
so
same
it's just
age.
a couple of years ago.
They're the same age. The 6950 XT and the 1700 XTX are the same age. They were both released in 2022. One was mid, one was late. Like, there's no way they should have different support.
Yeah, that's right. The only angle really with the original date is that that's when they had started. Well, that's when they had developed the architecture. So on one hand, you could say it's old, but then when you look at the release dates of the product, it's a very new architecture. And that's the commitment that AMD has to make when they are releasing architectures, especially one they know is going to be used across so many different APUs and GPU products. Is that, yeah, okay, you introduce the architecture in 2020, but if you're going to be releasing products with it for 5 years, you have to commit to like 10 years of support because that's like, and it doesn't matter if it was released 5 years ago. You're releasing products for 5 years, therefore you need to support it for an extremely long period of time. And if AMD back in the day, they released RDNA 2 in 2020, all the products came out. They didn't release any more products and they stopped being sold like a year later, the decision would be more acceptable. It wouldn't be acceptable, to clarify, I do not think it would be acceptable to remove driver support in that situation, but it would be more acceptable than selling products for 5 years with that architecture and them still being available today.
Yeah, it's really bad. It also means if they did get away with this, if they did follow through with plans and were allowed to, if they wanted to follow that same timeline again with RDNA 3 by this time, 2027, there would no longer be day one drivers for like a 7900 XTX or any of the 7000 series. Which imagine if that was the case, it's just insane.
Especially because with products like that, with products like RDNA 2, the actual time that people are able to purchase them at the advertised price can be pretty different to the launch price. Like 9070 XT that we're dealing with right now, that was launched in March, but people are only just starting now to be able to purchase it at the MSRP in the US, outside of the very initial wave, I guess. And so that changes timelines as well. With RDNA 2, there was all that crypto mining stuff happening at the time. People might have bought that card like 2 years after it came out because that's the time that they could actually afford to buy that model. And then having the rug pulled on driver support, like just after that, yeah, it's not great. So I think we're both on the same page that when it comes to driver support, and by driver support, we'll probably get into this eventually, like we don't necessarily mean new feature support, but we definitely mean game support, game optimizations, day one drivers for games. There has to be 7 years of support for that sort of thing. if not longer, like active driver development in that front for 7 years or more. And really, in the case of RDNA 2, 7 years may not cut it given when they've been launching products with that architecture. But you would agree, right? At least 7 years of updates.
Yeah, at minimum. But again, I would even be hesitant to put sort of a number on it because AMD sold parts like, an RX 580 for how many years? And again, we've seen RDNA 2 still on sale. There was plenty of them. Discrete GPUs I'm talking about as well. So graphics cards sold this year, like earlier this year, RX 6600s. I mean, I think Memory C is still selling them brand new to this day. So if you're really, it should be from when the last product was sold, in any meaningful quantity anyway, or even announced, because as you say, there's still new products being released using this graphics architecture. So for me, I'd want at least 5 years minimum from when the last product was released, because it means that the person who bought or the people that bought the last few get 5 years of support on that product. I mean, that just seems like common sense, right? That's what you would want when you buy a new product. Because we're not talking about people buying these secondhand 5 years after they were manufactured.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, at least in my opinion, game optimization, the whole game support thing is an advertised feature and one of the most important features of the driver package. Like the reason I upgrade my drivers regularly is to ensure that they have the best, latest patches and optimizations for the latest releases. And so that's a very important thing. And these days, it's also questionable how splitting drivers would work in a sense, because there are some games that flag certain driver releases and do not let you launch the title if your drivers are outdated to a certain degree. Like you can't just go and install a very old Nvidia driver and expect Battlefield 6 to work. It will load up a message at launch saying your driver is out of date, and it will essentially force you to upgrade the driver because it will not work if the driver update is not at the required level. And so this is something that wasn't really the case in games like a decade ago. So it's unclear to me what would happen if, let's say, there's a future game that's released and it has a driver check for AMD drivers. And if they had split the drivers like this, like what would happen if the driver version is like not matching it? Would your RDNA 2 GPU just not work in that game at all?
I don't think it's a huge issue because the game developer would just have to look for the two different branches, like two different versions of the driver.
Yeah, they might not, though.
Well, yeah, it does complicate things a little bit. I mean, I'm not a big fan of those features to begin with, because they probably are just more annoying than anything. And yeah, it's probably good for, I don't know, I guess if you're a more casual user and you don't always upgrade or update your graphics display drivers, then maybe, I don't know. I find those things just to be pretty annoying because they do, you run into false positives and other problems with them where it's just an unnecessary roadblock. And if the game crashes or whatever, people usually work out sooner or later they've got to update their display drivers to solve that problem.
One of the angles that I've seen people get very frustrated with, even, with this current situation that we're in with the driver branches being split, is that people are still very upset that AMD are even splitting the drivers at all and are feeling like splitting RDNA 2 into a separate branch, even if it will be getting game support and optimizations, represents that driver being like a downgraded version or that they're not getting the support that they need. And this seems largely related to feature support. The thinking being that having the split branches means that the latest features will be integrated for RDNA 3 and 4, but features will not be provided or supported for RDNA 1 and 2, and that it'll only be game optimizations. And that if there was this unified driver, no split driver branches, that maybe RDNA 1 and 2 would have the same feature support, or at least the opportunity for the same feature support. I think this is kind of a weird angle in my mind. I'm not 100% sure how you think about this, but at least with NVIDIA GPUs, they've got a unified driver branch for all of their architectures that are currently supported for game-ready drivers. But that means absolutely nothing in terms of feature support, because the features will be locked and restricted to whatever architectures that NVIDIA feels like, regardless of whether there is a unified driver branch or not. And I would have thought that whether the driver branch is unified or not, that AMD would do a very similar thing with features that they don't want to support on RDNA 2.
Yeah, look, I certainly understand the concern of where people are coming from, because it's about the intent, right? The intention here was to split the drivers up so one doesn't get the proper support and one does. So given that, I can see why people there's an ongoing concern there, even though AMD appears to have fully backtracked on those plans now. But they kind of can't backtrack on the branch thing, because then they're just admitting exactly what we already know.
Well, and also to be clear, they haven't backtracked on feature support. New feature support is not one of the things that they've listed.
But that's irrelevant, because people saying, oh, the reason why they had to split, like advocating for why they had to, or justifying why they had to split the drivers up, is because, there's going to be upcoming features and FSR4 support and all this for these newer GPUs that aren't going to work on the older GPUs, and therefore you need two drivers, which absolutely is not the case and never has been the case. And the driver can simply detect what hardware it's working with and enable or disable certain features, as it currently does.
Yeah, it currently does for FSR4. They had a unified driver branch, and FSR4 support was only available for RDNA 4. Yeah. They didn't need to split off the RDNA 4 driver branch to enable that.
No, this is actually going to now create more work for AMD than the other way around. It's just that the intention was to have it create less work, because they could essentially have a driver they largely neglect that RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 users are forced to use, and then a driver they could focus all their efforts on that support the products they're currently selling. It's that simple.
Yeah, it was designed to cut on, QA, for example, testing the drivers. If you don't update the RDNA 2 driver as often, you don't have to test it as often. So it's a pretty big time saving there.
Yeah.
Whereas now they've split the paths, but they basically, because they're committing to driver support day one for games, they basically still have to do all the driver testing. So yeah, it kind of defeats the purpose.
But yeah, like I said, I can understand the concern, because it's like, first of all, a lot of people have lost faith in AMD. I think a lot of people aren't stupid. They know what we know.
Yeah.
They know exactly what AMD were trying to achieve here and why they were trying to achieve it. And now we've seen them backtrack, and they've backtracked 100% to us in writing, saying that no, nothing's changing now. We're just doing this thing because they can't really give a reason why. And yeah, so basically they've told us that game support, day one optimization will continue, not indefinitely, but they've basically said expect all future games. So I don't know when the timeline now is for that. But they, the three examples you gave, they said, look, they'll be getting day one optimizations, and so will other games. So is it going to be those three plus one and then no more? And that's where, it's going to be a community effort to keep AMD honest there.
I guess with the feature support thing, like, where do you stand on, like, how long these companies should be supporting new features as opposed to game support? So I'm thinking things like, FSR4 Int8 is kind of a weird example, because we know that works, whereas potentially with other features we don't really know whether they would work. But you know what I mean? Like, new features come to a driver update.
Yeah. It's a bit of a gray area.
Is this a big angle that people should be concerned about? Like, should AMD be putting support back 5-7 years for features, or?
Well, I don't really have a single yes or no or whatever answer for this. I think if they can do it, they should do it. It's like out of the kindness of your heart type deal. Like, these people have bought your hardware. In a way, they're supporting your brand. So, be nice to do the same in return. But where I don't think you're necessarily entitled to have those new features is that you were never sold the product based on those features existing or being supported in the future. Like, if they said, buy an RDNA, 2 GPU, because we're going to continue to improve FSR and there'll be new models and new versions and stuff like that, then it's like, well, you kind of did promise you would continue to improve that. I don't know if they did that.
I don't think so. I don't think they did.
I don't believe they did. So if they've put additional resources into developing these new features to help sell newer products, then, I think it's like I said, I think they should offer them, but I'm not saying they have to. Whereas I'm saying they have to offer the day one game optimizations for these newer products or products they're currently selling. Like that's no question about that. But the new features thing, you weren't sold these features, you weren't promised these features. You bought the product as is, and you just hoped that you would get good driver support for the life of that product, which isn't a couple of years. As we were saying, it's probably at least 7 years, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think my sort of stance has usually been there has to be a genuine technical reason to not support a feature, because usually, and obviously this isn't always the case, but usually with a feature, it's kind of just it either works or it doesn't, like a game sort of, or any sort of software. It's like if the instruction sets are supported, for example, it should just work on the older products. And so there's no real reason to restrict it in that sense, or maybe it would only require very limited optimizations to get it working, which I think would make it, there has to be some sort of genuine technical reason. Now, obviously there are circumstances where there are genuine technical reasons, newer instruction sets, newer features. FSR4, for example, uses FP8 instructions, which aren't supported on RDNA2. So when you're sort of looking at, a feature like that and making support for older architectures, genuine technical reason why that doesn't work. Now, the Int 8 version is different because that, first of all, it runs and looks different. So it is a different feature, but that's a whole different discussion. But we've seen this with things like DLSS as well. DLSS requires tensor cores. GTX GPUs did not have tensor cores, so couldn't run on GTX GPUs. I know they potentially have made CUDA versions that were downgraded, kind of like an FSR4 Int 8 situation, but the latest models of DLSS obviously require tensor cores and all that sort of thing. So genuine technical reasons, I think, is a reason to restrict features. But then, yeah, as you sort of say, like new features as part of new GPU architectures as a reason to upgrade, I think is okay. I feel like game support has always been this sort of implicit advertised feature. Like it is part of the GPU that you're buying. It will work in new games for a reasonable amount of time. It's not something they have to put on the box like game support for years or whatever. Like it's been a thing for so long now that it's part of the ecosystem that you get when you're buying a GPU, and has certainly been proven up until recently for most products. But yeah, like I think with things like FSR4 Int 8, there's going to be this weird position where we know it works on RDNA2.
That's the problem.
Yeah, there's no ambiguity because they accidentally uploaded the source code. So they basically have to produce FSR4 Int 8 for RDNA2 now that we know it works. There'd be no excuse.
Well, yeah, to be clear, that's what I'm saying. I think they should. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily a feature that you're entitled to because you bought one of these older Radeon GPUs before this feature existed.
I agree. Yeah.
But I think they should, and I think it's stupid if they don't, because in a way they're the underdog. I know AMD makes stupid amounts of money, but they're the underdog compared to their competitor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a really bad look if you can make products you've already sold better, and it really isn't any skin off AMD's back to do so, but they choose not to do so.
Especially because it's proven. Like, I guess if we had no idea about FSR4 Int 8, how it works, they could have come out and said something like, we can get this working on RDNA 3, but not RDNA 2 because of insert technical explanation for why that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
But they're kind of being put into this difficult position because we have, and other channels have tested this and we know it to work. And so, yeah, I agree. It's kind of not an advertised feature. Like you would never advertise FSR4 for RDNA 2 because no one knew about that when that card was launched. But they probably should be doing this. And I feel like, you've mentioned that AMD is an underdog. Nvidia has actually been doing a pretty good job of supporting older architectures with features like DLSS 4 upscaling at the very least. And I think ray reconstruction is also supported back to the 20 series. And so it would be a pretty bad look to have Nvidia sort of going, well, if you had bought a 20 series GPU, you would have gotten all of our latest DLSS 4 upscaling features over time. And then for AMD to have a feature that we know works for RDNA 2 to then not provide that for those customers, I think that would be a very bad look.
Yeah, bad look, huge mistake. Like I said, underdog. If you're the underdog or you're coming from any position from behind, and in their case, they're well behind. What have you got to do? You've got to work much harder to win over consumers. You've
Yep.
got to try and give them more. You've got to try and look after them better. And that's what they did with Horizon, which is why the Radeon thing has always been so perplexing, so confusing. It's like, what the hell's going on here? Like, they seem to just want to shoot themselves in the foot. They're not trying at all. And you would think having Nvidia as a competitor and the way they are with a lot of the things they do, it wouldn't be too hard to look good. But they really make it look hard. Like, they really make it look difficult. And this would be a very easy, obvious win for them. And again, we've talked about stuff on the CPU side, like platform longevity, ongoing support, why that's a huge win for AMD, and it's really helped Ryzen shine and become as successful as it is. But then they don't, again, do any of that with Radeon. It's, you know, we're talking, the entire subject of this podcast has been AMD trying to be dirty and end support for products they definitely shouldn't be ending support for way too early, and then features they could absolutely offer to people who have invested and bought their products. And again, it should really be no skin off their back to do so. We know, like, we know this, right? As you said multiple times, we've already tested it, they can do it. How is it not already a thing? How has this not been a huge win for them, like an official announcement?
Yeah, it's bizarre. And
It is.
I think as well, like, AMD, they don't need to go all out on feature support. Like, they don't need to necessarily do exact same day, exact same time new features support for all of their graphics cards. But even just like making a genuinely reasonable attempt, like sort of saying, even things like, hey, we've got this new feature and we're working to put it across all of our GPU architectures, but we're going to be launching on the latest and greatest products first. But, we're still going to support RDNA 3, RDNA 2, and so on eventually with these features. Like, we're working on it. We are going to get this thing out. I feel like that would, like, even just communicating that messaging is sort of a win for people.
It's a good faith thing because they didn't do a great job with FSR. They announced it initially. It took forever to come out. So the products that did get FSR that we're talking about here, like RDNA 2, for example, they weren't well looked after with the FSR that they got. It was announced. It took forever. Then when it came out, it was in a handful of crappy games. The initial implementation was probably better than initial DLSS, but still not amazing, not great. And it wasn't a huge success for those that had those GPUs. You did multiple videos covering it, showing how superior DLSS was to FSR. And so while you sort of had that rocky ride, the kind of blurry image quality, not the greatest upscaling, and then you get FSR 4 Int 8, it's like, well, okay, we sort of got there in the end. But now it's been proven they could offer that to you officially, and they've chosen, well, so far not to. Just weird.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens when they might never release this feature for all I know. But if they do...
Sorry to cut you off and say, well, it seems to me that they're not going to. And the best evidence we have for that, again, is the subject of this podcast. You don't split the driver branches and claim that you're putting it in maintenance mode and then go, oh, by the way, here's FSR for it. Like, you just don't do that. That was never on the cards.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking more along the lines of we don't even have this feature released for RDNA 3 yet, which would still have been part of the supported driver feature. So we don't know whether, well, first of all, whether they are going to release this feature at all. They may never release it for RDNA 3 either.
Yeah, because seems like it's not going to happen.
It's just an in development thing. We don't really know. It seems like they could just release it now and it would work. But then AMD's got this big FSR Redstone update that's supposed to be coming at some point that improves things like frame generation to use AI technologies and various different things. Maybe it's supposed to be part of that. There's just a lot of questions there. But I think the intention was to not support RDNA 2. And certainly when you use FSR for Int 8, the DLLs and use all that method, it just works with RDNA 3. So you can use the latest drivers, put it in, it works fine. With RDNA 2, you had to revert to a certain driver to get it to work. So it wasn't as seamless, and that was maybe showing some intent there that it was not going to work or not be supported on RDNA 2.
Mm-hmm.
not sure on that one, but yeah, certainly splitting of the driver paths was indicative that they were going to very likely not, if they were going to release FSR4 in 8, that it was not going to be supported on RDNA 2.
Yeah, no chance.
So yeah, I mean, Nvidia's done, like, not to say that Nvidia supports all of their products perfectly. They do have some weird feature restrictions and things like that. The one that comes to mind most recently is sort of when they released frame generation and restricted it to the RTX 40 series. They justified this with a technical reason, saying that RTX 40 series GPUs had optical flow hardware and RTX 30 series and older did not. And so that was a requirement. Frame generation has to be 40 series only. With DLSS 4, they changed the frame generation model to no longer require the optical flow pass. It now is just done on tensor cores via AI, optical flow systems. And so you would think that when that move happened, that it should now be supported across all tensor core GPUs, all the RTX GPUs. That optical flow technical reason is no longer applicable, but they've still restricted it to the 40 series and 50 series. And when we asked them about this ages ago, earlier this year, they didn't really provide too much of a legitimate answer. It was very, very wishy-washy sort of wording on that. So yeah, I mean, companies obviously try and restrict features to the newest products to sell GPUs. Like, that's part of it. But again, you were sort of saying with AMD, like, because they're in this underdog status, they need to be going above and beyond with all these feature support, long-term support for things that they can't really, I guess, get away with it in the sense that Nvidia's been able to get away with frame generation for 40 series and up only.
Well, they haven't outdone Nvidia in terms of sales, right? They haven't outdone Nvidia in terms of market share. They haven't outdone Nvidia in terms of the product stack, the amount of SKUs they have. They haven't outdone them in terms of overall performance. So they haven't beaten Nvidia really anywhere when you compare these two current generations. So a chance for AMD to at least offer some sort of compelling reason, incentivize people to invest in Radeon rather than GeForce, would be for better product support, would be for them making their features more open and available across a wider range of products and not just limiting them to always the newest and latest thing to try and get you to feel bad about having the latest and newest thing, to have the latest and greatest features. So that's one area that is well within their control, that they could influence right now, and they just, for whatever reason, choose not to. And we use the term, underdog, poor little AMD or whatever. AMD makes mad money. They're crushing it. They've been doing very well for the last few years, and their latest earnings report, I'm pretty confident, is the best they've ever done. I think it was somewhere in the realm of $9 billion. So they're making money. They definitely have the cash to splash on software engineers and developing drivers and all of the things that Nvidia is doing. I think they might be making more money now than Nvidia was like 4 or 5 years ago. So, and Nvidia was able to do a lot back then. So anyway, my point is, AMD is making a lot of money, so they can afford to do this stuff.
Obviously, part of that is the data center gains, but even if you look at the gaming specific gains, it's like more than double what they were making last year or a couple of years ago in terms of just the gaming division. And so and this is the thing that is always frustrating with large corporations and sort of the lessons they take from these sorts of things. One lesson that you could take from making so much more money now with Radeon products than you were previously is that, restricting FSR4 to RDNA 4 was a really successful move. And so what we need to be doing is more exclusive features, more locking of things down, more NVIDIA-like stuff. Whereas I think the actual reason that a product like the 9070 XT and RDNA 4 has sold more than prior is just the overall quality of the product is better. And that's been the problem with Radeon GPUs previously, are things like the value proposition, the feature support, things like that. And it's not so much restricting FSR4 to that GPU. It was that they had developed FSR4 at all. That was the thing that enabled them to get more sales, in addition to things like price to performance and all that sort of stuff. And so the lesson is continue making good quality products. And part of that is the support for those products. A good product is a product that is supported for customers for a long period of time. And it's just a very simple thing, as you said many times, that can be done. It's not difficult to support things, especially things like FSR4 Int 8 that we know work and have already been developed. So that's a very easy win. But just like it can't be that expensive to have a few developers working on RDNA 2 driver support for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about a company that made over $1 billion in the quarter for gaming, and they can't employ like just a few software developers on a full-time basis to work on that.
Well, exactly. And what makes it even more ridiculous is the fact that their share of the pie doesn't represent the overall revenue that is generated by that industry. And not only that, but it is a growing industry. So imagine being in an industry where there's just billions and billions and billions of dollars to be had, and it's a growing industry, and you just keep finding ways to fumble making inroads into that industry when you're one of two competitors as well, one of three competitors. It's just it's crazy that they keep doing some of that. And to pick drivers of all the things as well to make it, look like you're fumbling and it's a weakness is crazy. Like all the driver stuff and I think you said it in the first video, like we feel that AMD's bashed for the Radeon drivers unfairly. Like they've been in a really good state for a really long time now. And they're easily as good, if not in a lot of ways better than what Nvidia's doing. Nvidia's had their fair share of driver issues with this current generation. Heaps of problems on the laptop side when I was speaking to Jared. It's crazy how broken the GeForce drivers are there. But then they go and do this, which sort of it basically validates all the invalid claims in a way about Radeon drivers. So it's a wild thing for them to go and do.
I think with the driver thing, like if you think about a casual person, like not someone that follows Hardware Unboxed, the thing outside of the performance of the product that most people are interested in are drivers. Like no one care. Like normal people don't care about like video encoding quality and output and CUDA and stuff like that. Your mainstream gamer, what do they talk about? The card's performance and what they actually get in the games, and then how good are the drivers? How often do we hear effectively just misinformation about the quality of drivers between these brands, especially things like Nvidia has way better drivers than AMD, or AMD drivers suck, or something like that, which is built upon a reputation from many, many, many years ago, which was probably valid back then, may not be true now. But that is something that you see constantly talked about across the internet among people, among the casual people. It's like, oh, I wouldn't buy an AMD GPU because drivers or whatever. And you ask them for reasons, they don't really know the reasons, but they've just heard whispers like their mate might have said, NVIDIA drivers are better and blah, 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 blah. All of that. So you put in effort as a company to fix drivers, to improve the quality of drivers. Radeon software, they've put a lot of work and effort into making the utility really good, make it work, have all these features in it. And then to go and basically pull this thing that people can point to and say, well, AMD has inferior drivers, and have it actually be true is crazy. It's crazy because those normal people who these things filter back to will eventually get back to this whole like, oh, I've heard NVIDIA drivers are better and AMD drivers are worse. I'm not really sure why. So I'm going to ask my mate who might know a few things. Like, is this true? Like, what's happening with AMD drivers? Oh, yeah, AMD doesn't support their drivers for as long. Factually true. At least it was, or potentially will be for this sort of thing. And so you don't want to validate things that are potentially maybe conspiracy theory sort of level or not based in facts or anything with facts.
Yeah, that's right.
You want to avoid that as much as possible so that the reputation can improve over time.
And where I've seen a lot of people claiming that this is really no different to what Nvidia does. AMD is just being more transparent about it, which I think is very generous. But maybe they're also not entirely wrong. So they're saying, look, I've got this GeForce GPU that's a bit older. and it's not doing as well as it should be relative to newer GPUs in these games. I don't think they're providing much optimization work for this GPU, this architecture. Look, may or may not be true. There are real reasons for why newer architectures can age better. Games are using some of the features and so on and so forth. But it could also be that, look, Nvidia isn't putting as much time and effort into optimizing this latest, greatest game for GeForce 20 series that they might be for GeForce 40 and 50 series. That's possibly a real thing. I would not claim one way or the other on that. It's kind of an irrelevant point for a couple of reasons. Like, first of all, we've talked about AMD playing the game. So if Nvidia is doing a thing, don't be more transparent about it. Again, we don't want them to be anti-consumer or whatever, but you can't compete with a company that's saying they're optimizing the drivers for 3 or 4 year old architectures and not doing it, and then your solution is not to just do the same thing but split it into 2 branches and say that this is being placed in maintenance mode. And again, I'm not confirming what these people are saying. It's just claims that they're making, and I don't think it's really a valid point. It also, for me, what Nvidia is doing in the context of this is really, well, it's largely irrelevant. It's actually entirely irrelevant for me, because people who bought a 6800 XT don't give a crap about what's happening for someone who bought the other thing. Like, the point is, you bought a 6800 XT, you want to see that thing supported correctly. So this was really an AMD issue, and an AMD issue only. It wasn't about an AMD versus Nvidia issue. It was about AMD supporting the people that bought their product. And as I said, I think in the position they're in, they should be doing a better job of that than Nvidia. So I guess my main point here is, we don't need to make this an AMD versus Nvidia thing. It's purely about RDNA 2 in particular owners getting the support they deserve. And you could have bought one of those GPUs at the start of this year, and then you find out that the drive has been placed in maintenance mode. So that's really, really bad. And then as for whether or not Nvidia does this, it's just a thing that people are saying, really. Like, I don't have any evidence as to whether or not they're doing that. And if you look at it on a per game basis, you may just find that it's the architectural improvements or the additional VRAM or whatever it might be for why these newer architectures are performing better relative to the older ones in the newer titles when compared to older titles.
Whether or not either of these companies, if they were both playing the game right, like whether or not they actually are or aren't optimizing for the latest architectures, they are claiming, well, at least Nvidia is claiming, that they are providing game-ready support for games on architectures way back to whatever the case is. And this does give you a little bit of a shield in terms of the false advertising angle, because if it does come out that a game is broken on an architecture that has got game-ready support for it, then that's false advertising. Like, you can't be claiming this driver supports a 20 series card, for example, in a latest title, and then it not work. Obviously, that isn't day one game-ready support, right? Whereas what AMD were trying to do was, by putting into the maintenance branch and sort of saying it'll only get critical fixes and security updates, there's no guarantee that if a game was broken in that sense, that you would get the driver support for that game on that architecture.
Certainly in a timely manner anyway.
Yeah, there's, it's not having day one driver support. And there's always this thing, people are sort of saying in the comments things like, well, critical fixes clearly would have meant that, games, they would have ensured games work. Not necessarily. Critical fixes can sometimes mean things like a boot issue. Like, there's a boot, like your Windows operating system won't boot due to a bug or something.
At the very least, it means that they will acknowledge the issue and fix it, let's say. I'm not saying they wouldn't fix it at all, like what you're saying, but regardless, what it means is, when the game launches and you've got your 6900 XT that you spent a ton of money on and you're ready to play this game, and your GPU is more than capable of playing the game, and then there's a bug that either causes the game to crash heaps, or textures are missing, or name any one of 1,000 possibilities, you might not get a fix for a month or the next seasonal driver update. So you've bought this game, you want to play this game, and then you can't. Like, whereas if it had, as you say, with the GeForce thing, the game ready driver, it needs to be game ready. They can't solve the problem a month later. And look, there might be someone might go, but I have this GPU and I have a game ready driver and it had this crashing issue. It's like, well, I don't know if that was happening just on your architecture or whatever. I'm sure there's some edge cases where things took a bit longer to iron out than they should have, but it wouldn't be a reoccurring case, which is what you would probably run into eventually with a driver that had been placed in maintenance mode. Because it was getting placed in maintenance mode now, and let's just say they proceeded as planned, the serious effects of this would probably be realized in 1 to 2 years from now, when again a 6900 XT, 6800 XT should be still very usable using sort of medium to low quality settings, but the experience will become so bad that you would have to upgrade. And again, it just ruins those cards for the secondhand market as well.
Yeah, and I think regardless of whether we have definitive proof of Nvidia optimizing old architectures or not, we do have definitive proof that Nvidia supports those older products with features. Mm-hmm. They did get DLSS 4 support with the Transformer model this year, which is a very significant upgrade for those owners. Mm-hmm. So they did offer that sort of support, and AMD placing things into the maintenance mode, we don't really know what's going to happen with the features, but they definitely wouldn't have gotten features if they had put it into that specific branch.
And also to date, if we compare competing products from 5 years ago, they're pretty similar today. Like, for example, RDNA A1 was meant to have this old, outdated architecture, didn't support hardware ray tracing, that sort of stuff. But if you compare that to a 2060 Super, it was basically a little bit faster or roughly on par with that back when they were released, and that is still the case to this day. So you would think both of those products were being supported equally to this point in time. So it's not like Nvidia had abandoned that product while RDNA 1 was still getting support up until now.
Yeah, and you see things within games as well, like two products across different generations that had roughly the same performance but different architectures. You would see without optimizations in new titles, and new titles with significantly different game engines. Like, I think things like Unreal Engine 4, for example, is probably pretty polished for a lot of these things, but newer cutting edge sort of things, you would see the old architectures fall off massively if there was no genuine optimizations being done. You would see, if they were only applying a game fix to, let's say, the 40 series and 50 series, but not the 20 series, but then you had like a 2080 Ti versus a 3070 versus whatever, right? You'd see the 2080 Ti like nosedive off a cliff in performance without optimizations. Mm-hmm. But generally, the 2080 Ti has kind of, from my understanding, has kind of gone the other way because of its additional VRAM. It's actually the better product than something like a 3070 over mm-hmm. time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and so,
sure.
We don't necessarily have like, let's look inside the binaries of the driver to see exactly whether or not these things are being applied or not. But all that sort of additional evidence suggests that the support has been reasonable. So,
yeah, whenever we've done, because there used to be those claims all the time of NVIDIA gimping drivers. I don't know if you recall that, but there used to be a real hot button topic back in the day, probably 5 or so years ago. And every time we investigated these claims, we never, ever found evidence that was the case. There's never really been evidence that that's a different thing. That's not including optimizations. That's going out of your way to unoptimize older architectures. And so it is a separate thing. But whenever we've done those investigations, we've also found that any optimizations that sort of apply to newer GPUs appear to be applied to the older ones as well. And again, you can check that pretty easily by testing older and newer games.
Yeah, and it's complicated, testing game ready drivers from the sense that it's not like, I know that obviously there's drivers that claim to be games ready support for specific titles at a specific time. it's not necessarily that exact driver that has got the entire work done for that game. And so you can't necessarily go, oh, I'm going to test the game ready driver versus the version directly prior and sort of say, oh, well, we're getting a 5% performance boost or whatever from that driver because of the game ready support. Companies like Nvidia and AMD do work on game support for a long time prior to the release of games. And so these things get rolled into the driver over time. And then in addition to that, a lot of work is actually done on the game side as well. I've mentioned many times you can look at credits of many major releases and you will see contributions from Nvidia, AMD, Intel engineers to a lot of titles, which goes into part of the game ready support optimization side of things. It's not necessarily the driver doing the work, but also the game fixes improving things on that side. And so what you'd want is that, if there's game ready driver support and they're actively working on an RDNA 2 architecture, that work is also being done on that sort of game side of things as all part of a nice ecosystem, which again makes that sort of testing of things very, very difficult. Like I tried to look back at Battlefield 6 and I was like, okay, let's compare the latest game ready driver to old drivers. First of all, they don't work. As I sort of mentioned, the pop-up comes up, you can't run old drivers. And then the most recent or the oldest driver that does work is not that old relative to the open beta. And so you can't really sort of look at and go, did they provide optimizations for that? You kind of have to go back like a couple of years to sort of go, what's the performance uplift? What's the optimization like? That sort of thing. But in any case, the point is that when you advertise those features, there is sort of this, obligation to do it, to not falsely advertise to your consumers. And that's what they want, that sort of guarantee as part of their driver releases, not having this wishy-washy stuff or whatever. It's like day one, driver support for games is essential, and that's what people want to see advertised.
Yeah. So I guess the question I have for you is, you've dedicated a content piece on Hardware Unboxed talking about AMD marketing, PR stuff, all their blunders over the years, and sort of documenting that and how things have gone down. This one's an interesting one for me. I know a lot of people are like, AMD never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and AMD marketing, PR, all that stuff. They're copying a beating over all of this. But if you accept that they were splitting the branches up and they were actually placing RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 in maintenance mode. So there's that decision there first, I guess, that you have to analyze, ignoring all the stuff that came after that, because that was clearly a decision that was made by management, and it was a thought out plan. I don't want to say well thought out, but it was a thought out plan that they were executing upon, right? It wasn't something that some guy in the driver team thought, oh, I'm going to do this because this seems like it'd be easier for my job, or someone who manages that department was like, let's do a thing. This was a carefully executed plan. They planned on doing this thing. So first of all, I guess, what's your thoughts on AMD planning to do this and putting the wheels in motion on it?
Well, it's a terrible decision. I mean, there's really no way around it. It's a terrible decision. I get that if you're internally in an engineering team that you want to be making decisions like this because it's easier and more cost effective. So I get the angle of like why they would do it. It's not like there's no reason they would make this decision. There's an obvious reason they'd make the decision. It's more, I think there's a lack of thinking at AMD about how these decisions might be perceived. Like there are some decisions that you're going to make from an engineering or cost perspective that are going to be nearly impossible to sell to people as benefiting them. And so when you're sort of coming up as a company and you're deciding upon something like this, that should be maybe part of the thinking. I feel like that was zero part of the thinking. So yeah, making the decision, obviously terrible, but then also a terrible lack of awareness about how that would go down with the consumers and how like a PR team would be able to sell that. Because in my mind, there's really no way that you could sell to gamers the lack of ongoing driver support for RDNA 2 And when you split the drivers, people are going to start asking questions. Like, it's not even that they could hide it. It's that the drivers would get split. People realize there's two different versions, start asking questions. What is your response going to be? You have to have an actually reasonable response. And if you're going to make that sort of decision, you need to be in a position where there's some sort of justification behind it that you can tell to consumers. And so I feel like there's just a complete lack of factoring that into the decision-making process, in addition to the poor decision to make the decision in the first place.
Yeah, it really is tone deaf. I think that's the key issue here, is the fact that they thought this would be something, not necessarily even a good idea, just something they could actually do and should do,
Yep.
and then went about doing. For me, that's the most problematic part of all of this. Not the PR response to it, because I guess they're just trying to I don't know.
They're given a poo sandwich. They were handed the biggest poo sandwich from management on that one. Seriously.
They were eating shit on that one. So yeah, I think we agree on that. And then yeah, what came afterwards really was them clarifying the plan. So people like they should have never used those terms. They should have never said that. They should have. It's like, but no, that was where they were being the most honest with you, is when they were telling you that they were placing the driver in maintenance mode. That was the honest plan. Like, that was the honest response. That was the plan. That's what they were doing. What they misread or didn't understand, for reasons that I can't comprehend, is what the blowback would be on that. And I think it'd be funny if they had have come to you. They go, Tim, all-knowing Tim. I don't know why they chose you. They just decided to. And they said, we have this idea, this plan that we're thinking of doing, but because we ran our RDNA 4 pricing structure past you and you sent us a really long lecture on why we were dummies, we have this idea. Not everyone's on the same page with this one at AMD, so we just want your input. Can you send us another 2,000 word plus lecture on what we should do here? We're thinking of placing RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 in maintenance mode, splitting the driver branches. Is that something you think we should do? What do you think the public perception to this is going to be, Tim? Let us know. You know, don't mince your words. Give us your honest opinion. Would you have been advising them that that would be an okay thing to do, and you're sure it would be fine and gamers would understand?
I mean, I would have referenced the AMD makes mistakes video and listed all of the mistakes, and I would say all of those would pale in comparison to the stupidity of this decision. Because back when I was making that video, I think some of the things we were talking about were things like messing up the pricing and then like launching FSR 3 in a really bad state and crappy games and those sorts of blunders. This is like kind of a next level blunder mistake. So the pricing thing's pretty bad for things like 7900 XT. That does kill products. But this is like reputational damage level of bad mistake.
You know what this is, Tim? And you have a pretty good example you could give them. You would have said, guys, I'm not really sure why you're pitching this idea to me, but I'll give you your answer. Do you remember that time when you had that really good platform, AM4, and you released this little slide, this little tidbit, this little spoiler, where you were like 300 and 400 series motherboards wouldn't get support for this new upcoming architecture you called Zen 3? Remember how that went down? This would be worse than that. Because people have already bought the products. I mean, yeah, there was the motherboards that they'd already bought, but this would be even worse than that. So it's amazing that they can do that, receive monumental backlash, completely revert, essentially apologize and say, no, we're going to open up, we're going to make it work. And then years later, go and do the same thing with Radeon, which is essentially the same thing. It's like you bought a product and now we're not going to support it the way we should. That's
I have seen some criticism of the marketing team that, you know, they could have managed this better, not made it as confusing. Obviously, the Gamers Nexus video is talking a lot about their very confusing messaging on this sort of thing. But I really think that this lies more with the management above the marketing team. You can only do when you're handed something like this. There's only so much you can do.
Well, they can. Like they were asked, "Are you doing this thing?" Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I know they tried to walk it back by, some of the things saying like it was confusing and all that. You might have been confused about what was happening. Like they probably could have been a bit clearer that this is a change in decision. It wasn't just people having misread the initial statements, but those first couple of clarifications, like there's nothing more they could have done outside of lying.
Well,
like,
if the plan was to do what what they were doing,
you can't be like, yes, we're removing driver support from games and we're going to just lie to you and say that that's not happening. Like the messaging they used was a massaged way of delivering that news.
I think it's because there's some people that think this was all a big misunderstanding. Us YouTubers and whoever else blew this out of proportion. It was a nothing burger. AMD never really meant the thing they were clarifying they meant. So therefore, this can be, chopped up to it's a simple case of AMD, messing things up, being incompetent with their messaging. So I think there's like people who are in that camp, and then there's people who are like, well, maybe they were doing the thing, but then they decided they weren't going to do the thing, and they just didn't make it clear enough that they weren't going to do the thing. And it's like, well, that's closer to the truth. But basically, they were going to do the thing. They then were caught off guard by the massive amounts of blowback, and then tried to still do the thing, but make it seem like they weren't really doing the thing. And when people weren't buying that, they're like, okay, you've got us. We're just not going to do the thing. That's pretty much the timeline of how this played out.
Yeah, 100%. And, often, I wouldn't have thought that things like the driver notes, which is really what this all stemmed from, was that line in the driver notes and people realizing the driver branches was. But my understanding is that it's not usually written by the PR people. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think it's more the driver team writes those notes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're just providing a very technical, accurate picture of what the drivers have done. And one of the things was no game support. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say the marketing team is faultless with some of the ways that they've handled this communication. I think the marketing and PR side of things has made worse mistakes that we've sort of talked about previously in some of those videos. But yeah, there just comes a time when you're given a decision by management that cannot be sold in any sort of way. And when it comes out that game support is not going to be provided for RDNA 2, there's no way you can sell that message. You can't be like, oh, we're going to maybe provide this support and maybe this. People read through that. There's no way you can sell it. And so I think the issue comes down to maybe one of two things. It's either the management teams that are making the decision in the first place are not consulting with the PR teams that would, I would think, be pretty up to speed with how this would go down in the community. Like, I know people like to paint these people as, morons that don't understand what's going on. But I think these people, like, knowing how much they actually do read comments, feedback, watch all the hardware unbox videos, Gamers Nexus videos and everything, the PR people are very aware of what the community is saying. It's just that sometimes they're not able to do certain things that would benefit the community because the decisions are made so much further up the chain. And so maybe there was no consulting with the PR people about how this decision would go down. So the decision is made, then given to the PR people to sort of sort out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or alternatively, maybe there was some consulting done between the two, and then the management effectively did not take on board the feedback that the PR people were saying. Because if the PR people could have said, like, this is going to go down really badly, and then management be like, yeah, we don't think it's going to be that bad though. Just work some messaging and figure it out. But ultimately, yeah, the buck stops with the management. So
yeah, bad decision, and then once the bad decision was made, yeah, they, like I said, it's really simple. They made the bad decision, and if you're the PR team, I'm saying to you, we've made this decision. Seems like some people aren't happy or they want clarification on the decision. Just make it sound like we're not really doing the thing that we're doing, and that they'll get some support. and then you word it as support when market needs blah 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 blah, and one thing leads to another. So
Yeah.
it's them just not understanding how the, and I guess that's the most troubling thing about all of this, and why it doesn't give you that much confidence in AMD and their ability to create products that are appealing to people, and why it's been really, yeah, it's no secret why it's been such a battle for them, and why they've struggled to have like this RDNA 4 moment for all of these years. If these are the internal decisions they make and think they're good decisions, it really does put it in a nutshell why they've had the struggles they've had. And again, we've heard stories from partners where they were at CES ready to announce RDNA 4, the 9070 XT for $750 US. It's like, what are you doing? Can't do that. And that's what they did though with RDNA 2 because of the cryptocurrency mining thing. They thought, well, we're just gonna anyway, AMD stuff.
It's wild that obviously there's some internal dynamics and things going on there with the PR teams, the marketing teams, management, all that sort of thing, maybe not working as effectively together as they should. Like I said, I think the marketing teams and things are pretty aware of how these products are going to go down. Speaking to them, they're not exactly like you say things. It's not like it's a huge surprise for them when you mention like, oh, the price of that product is poor or whatever. Like they kind of are getting an inkling and that sort of thing. Like they're fairly familiar with how like what a hardware unbox review is going to be if the price is bad and doesn't make sense for the product. So yeah, it seems like it's been a battle for them at Radeon with these sorts of things, and it's just bad for the consumers that once they've started to build up trust in other ways in terms of producing an architecture that's compelling, competitive from a price to performance perspective, has probably the best features that they've put into an architecture for quite some time in terms of things like FSR4, to then months later down the track just kill people's confidence in the longevity of these products through these weird sort of driver things. And I know they've backtracked at this point, but it still seems like the confidence in the brand, just from reading the reception onto your video, GN's video on Reddit and stuff like that, people still have hurt confidence based on this. Despite the backtrack, people saying, I'm not believing AMD's decision. I have to wait and see how it goes. Like the splitting of driver branches is still problematic and indicative of a lack of support for RDNA 2. So yeah, the brand has been damaged by this move, and it's something that cannot be reverted easily through a backtrack. It has to now be proven through support long term.
Well, it's because a lot of people who, and we see this in the comments all the time from AMD and Nvidia and Intel, whoever it is, people think that these companies are on their side, or they're on the same team. Like, I've bought a Radeon GPU. It's awesome. I've had a great experience with it. I love gaming with it. Go AMD. I'm going to buy a Radeon GPU next time. Clearly that happens with Nvidia and GeForce as well. It then hurts them to hear that these companies actually don't have their best interests at heart, and they're just, greedy corporations trying to maximize profits. But a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't view companies that way, which is confusing and hard to understand, but that seems to be more of the norm than anything else. And so when people think that, I'm supporting the underdog, go AMD, I've got a Radeon 6800 XT or 6700 XT, had more VRAM and it's aged really well and I love it and I enjoy it, blah, 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 blah. And then it turns out AMD's like, yeah, well, we're not supporting you anymore. Give us more money or rack off. Then that's where it does hurt them. And they're like, what? AMD's not my friend. They're not supporting me. And again, we see, it's not picking on AMD fans or people who buy AMD hardware. Like if we criticize Nvidia, boy, or Intel, we see the same thing. I remember it was very eye-opening to me, despite having done this job for over 2 decades, when I heavily criticized an Asus Strix product. Remember the 5700 XT that the cooler fell off? And other reviewers who tested on test benches didn't see the problem. It was more when it was in a horizontal position. And I basically gave the card a bad review, said it was very unimpressive, the cooling performance sucked, and it wasn't a good product. And yikes, the back, I was stunned. And I think even when we, a couple of the 4-phase VRM boards on the Intel processors from Asus, we criticized them. got a lot of Asus fans who were not happy with us criticizing Asus products. So it's a thing that just happens with all brands. People buy their products and they have a good experience, which is great, and then they continue to buy their products. But anyway, that's why people, I would say, have lost brand confidence or upset with AMD, because they really thought AMD was a brand that was going to look after them and give them like the very best support and all that sort of stuff, which unfortunately isn't the case. If AMD can get rid of you or get you to spend more money on their product, that's what they'll absolutely do. And that's what all of these for-profit companies do.
So I guess a final question that I've got for this sort of segment, and yeah, it's probably a long podcast at this point. Do you think this decision and reversal is going to impact the reviews of Radeon products in any way? So obviously, prior to the reversal, I think it probably would have had some impact, because it would have made it very clear that Nvidia GPUs have much better long-term driver support.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you sort of sit as our GPU reviewer now that they've reversed this, at least in terms of their words? We haven't really seen their actions, of course, but their words are saying that they've reversed it.
For the previous generation, we were saying AMD needed to offer at least a 20% discount to, justify buying their products. And then I think we sort of downgraded that or upgraded AMD to more like a 10% discount would be enough.
I think we said 15 for the 9070 XT. I can't quite remember.
Yeah, it was around. We'd improved their percentage there for them. So,
and to be honest, it's probably improved a little bit since then, considering one of the things I was a little concerned about was like how good FSR4 game support would be over time. I think AMD's done a pretty good job of proving themselves in that front. So, that improves things.
I think if at performance parity, a 10% discount would probably get me over the line to buy the Radeon GPU, because they're so similar in a lot of ways now. But then you throw this into the mix, ongoing driver support, day one drivers, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, well, it's only 10% at this point. Would you just spend the extra money now to get a GeForce GPU to ensure that you get that better long-term support?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and NVIDIA's proven this consistently. I don't think it's something where they chop and change their mind based on the generation that they're offering. NVIDIA for a long time now has very consistently supported GeForce GPUs for a very long time. And if anything, the support in the feature front has been improving in terms of the amount of older architectures that get access to features has gotten better over time. So yeah, that does make a difference. But then again, like, while AMD is sort of stuffed up, it's very much still unproven. Like,
that's right. So I don't want to have like a knee-jerk reaction to it, because with the review process, we do carefully consider all of the points. So while it's definitely in the back of my mind and something we have to keep an eye on, I don't know if it changes. I guess at this point, we just have to take them at their word, which we never like to do. But right now, nothing's happened. So
yeah, I think it's not so much like take them on their word. It's more like keep them honest to their word. Like, we'll be assessing what they've said and now seeing whether that's being implemented.
I guess my point is we have absolutely nothing to assess at this point in time. So it's difficult to, do you make any sweeping changes based on that? Or do you sort of go, well, they were going to do this thing we didn't like. They cop the backlash. They say they're fully backtracked on it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be pretty obvious within the next couple of months to the next year as to how this is going, because we'll be able to see how frequently AMD release drivers for RDNA 2 GPUs. Is it truly at the same cadence as they've said? Are they truly delivering the game support that they've said? And there'll be some pretty telling features moments as well, as we talked about FSR4 Int 8. If that comes to RDNA 3 but not RDNA 2, even though we know it works on RDNA 2, that's going to be a pretty clear indication that support for RDNA 2 is reduced. And that is something that would potentially impact, future recommendations. But right now, like, all those things are sort of in the maybe they will, maybe they won't category. But I would be pretty confident that AMD is aware that there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on this.
Yeah, they can't screw this up. There's no way.
Yeah, it's not like they can just slide this out in driver notes again. It's people are going to be on top of this and looking and assessing things, and especially channels that do a lot of game testing like a Daniel Owen. I imagine great content that he'd be making is things like seeing whether the driver patches do support products down to RDNA 2 for individual games. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of attention.
I think on that side of the fence, they've made more work for themselves for sure now. They're going to have to be on their game. They're going to have to be working. They're going to have to be working harder than ever on their drivers. I think that much you would hope is clear to AMD, the Radeon division at this point in time. Like they have to do that. As for the reviews, right now we're not reviewing like any new GPUs because there's no new GPUs to review. So we are in the fortunate position where, we're going to have a bit of time to evaluate what's going on and see. But at the end of the day, I don't think it changes too much for the reviews. It may factor into sort of our value equation, which, there's numerous things that affect that. But the key concern for AMD is like consumer confidence, the mindshare thing that Nvidia keeps effortlessly crushing them on because they allow them to. And this was just an epic blunder that they can't take back. Like
I just imagine Nvidia employees waking up and seeing this news or seeing our videos and like organizing a party and cheering.
Yeah. They're like,
they'd be so happy.
AMD done an AMD thing. I guess we can take the day off.
Yeah. Yeah. Rest easy, boys, because AMD's AMD'd themselves again. And our job is easy. So, yeah.
Crazy.
Oh, well. All right. Well, first of all, we should probably decide, are we going to do a boring life section or not? Because we've been going for almost an hour and a half.
I think we save it for a shorter podcast because my thing I wanted to talk about is probably going to take, I would say, at least 20 minutes, possibly half an hour. And we might have a shorter one next week, unless AMD does an AMD thing, and then we could have another hour and a half on our hands.
And that topic is, that could be main podcast stuff because it is vaguely tech related.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and anti-consumer. So that could be something. I'll tell one quick little story because it does relate to the podcast.
Yep.
I don't actually remember what episode this was, but it was quite a few weeks ago now. Do you remember when I told you the story about me buying Amino Z, the protein powder that I absolutely love? And they sent me a nice little handwritten note saying, thanks for your order, yada, yada. And I stuck it in my mouth like a toddler and then ripped my lip off and blood went everywhere and I horrified Balin.
Yeah.
That embarrassing story. Well, the good people at Amino Z must have watched that episode.
Don't know how. There's not much crossover between CPU and GPU podcast and bulk gains protein.
I may have to actually ask them how they caught wind of that little segment because one of their team members emailed me, sent a nice email saying, thank you so much for the shout out. We really appreciate it. Yada, yada. Sent a nice email. So that was great. And just basically confirmed that they had seen that shout out, that segment talking about the Amino Z. Well, we were less talking about Amino Z. I think I mentioned multiple times that I love it and it's really good. And Jared from Jared's Tech actually put me onto it. So
I think I talked to you a bit about it because I was interested in just.
Have you got any yet?
No.
Okay, you should.
No.
So
you were going to give me a sample in a suspicious white bag to take home, but we forgot last time I was there.
Well, I've got a lot of favorites, to be honest. There's a lot of great flavors, but I think my absolute favorite probably has to be the cookies and cream.
And this is not sponsored, just to be clear. We are not sponsored by Amino Z to talk about their products. Well, you just like it.
Nothing on this podcast is sponsored yet. Yes.
Yes. Sponsor us.
But at this point in time, I can honestly say nothing has been sponsored. Amino Z is an Australian company as well. So that's cool. They're, I think, based up in Sydney. But yeah, an Australian company. So it's cool to support another Australian company and they genuinely make great products. So if I've bought or used a great product, I'm just going to tell you guys about it on the podcast.
That's what we do on the podcast.
Yeah. Yep. So I was using, I forget now. Balin's sort of our resident gym junkie guy and he knows all the proteins and he got me onto I don't think he's here yet. No. Anyway, I forget. And it was decent. It was pretty good. But Jared came over. This is Jared from Jared's Tech, the laptop guy. He was finally good for something. He came over to collaborate on a video, stayed a couple of days. We had a couple of gym sessions, and he goes, "I've brought some protein powder for you guys to check out." I'll just quickly tell the story, even if you heard it last time. And Balin's like, "Nah, won't be as good as, I think it's Optimum Nutrition from memory. Won't be as good as their stuff. I've tried them all. Theirs is the best." And Jared's like, "I've tried that. This is better." So they had a little bit of an argument. And I said, guys, this can be easily settled. Jared bought some. Let's test it out. So I had it. I've used the Optimum Nutrition one. I had their vanilla from Amino Z, and instantly I was like, "Oh man, this is the best protein powder I've ever tried. This is really good." So Balin's like, "All right, give me some." Balin tried. He's like, you could tell he was like, "Yeah, okay." He like grudgingly, he's like, "You're right." Like, as the protein powder expert, I didn't know about this and hadn't tried it, so a little embarrassing. But yeah, this is better. So I hopped online, ordered a heap of different flavors, and really I haven't found a flavor that I don't like. But in my second order, I got the cookies and cream as one of the additional flavors that I tried, and I don't understand how it can taste so good and not be like bad for you. As in,
well, it might be, but no, it's probably not.
To my knowledge, it's not. And I believe all this stuff in Australia gets scrutinized. So again, I'm not an expert, which is why I'm not necessarily recommending this for your health or anything. It's just I take it. It seems to work well. And the taste is insane. Like it tastes like you're drinking. And maybe I'm exaggerating here because I haven't had one for a while, but it very much reminds me of drinking like an Oreo McFlurry from McDonald's. Like,
oh, right. Yeah.
And I used to love the Oreo McFlurries, but I don't have them anymore because, gym reasons. But it's very, when you come over, I'll give you some.
All right.
So anyway, that's not the point of my little story here. My point is that somehow the people at Amino Z know we talked about their product on the Harbour Unbox podcast, which is just pretty funny in itself, I think. So yeah, I'll have to find out if someone contacted them on a social media platform. They're like, "Hey, Harbour Unbox gave you a shout out," or if there's like an employee that works for Amino Z who's a computer nerd like us, and has that rare crossover like Balaam where they're a gym junkie and actually it's not that rare. I'm being silly. But anyway, I don't know is the answer. But they saw the podcast and they enjoyed it. So there you go, Tim.
All right, we'll save any more boring life discussion for next week. But obviously we had a lot of AMD discussion to get through on this one. And boy, don't they love making content for us. So thanks, AMD, for all the content we've been able to make. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. If you want to support the Hardware Unbox channel and the podcast as well, you can do so via Patreon. If you sign up, you get access to the ad-free version of this podcast feed, as well as many other perks. Discord channel, we've got monthly live streams, BTS stuff as well. So there's all that. Outside of that, you can obviously just get the video version on the Hardware Unboxed podcast YouTube channel or the audio feeds in all your usual places. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.